Hello, welcome to season 4, episode 6. Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. What is it? Hello, James. We're doing an episode just for you tonight. I thought you would like the topic of Bigfoot, so I'm doing this one specifically for you, James. Welcome in. So, I've vaguely looked into Bigfoot over the years, but I hadn't really looked deep into it. But, you know, sometimes they refer to it as Sasquatch or Yeti in different areas. But what it boils down to is a large, hairy, humanoid creature said to inhabit forests in North America, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. Now, what's really interesting is all the different things and stories surrounding Bigfoot. Most people know the typical story about Bigfoot being a hoax and they found the cameraman who dressed up as Bigfoot and it came out as a hoax. Everyone knows that story, I'm sure. We've all heard that one. And that's why many people believe that Bigfoot is a hoax because they've only heard the surface story. But when you actually start digging into it, there are many more stories about Bigfoot. And one that I thought was interesting was, I believe this. Yes, I've got it right here. Okay. So there was a story about a logging company in 1958. Someone named Jerry Crew, who was a bulldoze operator for a logging company in Humboldt County, California, discovered a set of large 16-inch or 410 millimeter human-like footprints sunk deep within the mud in the Six Rivers National Forest. Now, at first, we're just like, okay, maybe it's just someone playing a prank. He thought it was maybe someone playing a prank on him. So he told his boss, and they were like, just keep an eye out on it. Let us know if anything else happens. So when he told his coworkers, many claimed to have seen similar tracks on previous job sites, as well as telling of odd incidents, such as an oil drum weighing 450 pounds or 200 kilograms having been moved without explanation. The logging company men soon began using the word Bigfoot to describe the apparent culprit, obviously because it had such big feet. Now, Crew and others initially believed someone was playing a prank on them, as I said a second ago, but after observing more of these massive footprints, he contacted reporter Andrew Gonzalez of the Humboldt Times newspaper after he had taken a cast or a mold of the footprints, and they interviewed the lumber workers and wrote articles about the mysterious footprints, introducing the name Bigfoot in relation to the tracks and the local tales of large, hairy, wild men. Now, when he made the cast, it ended up on the front page of the newspaper on October 6th of 1958. The story spread rapidly as Gonzalez, that's the reporter, began to receive correspondence from major media outlets, including the New York Times and Los Angeles Times. As a result, the term Bigfoot became widespread as a reference to an apparently large, unknown creature leaving massive footprints in Northern California. Hello, Belinda Davis. Welcome in. We're talking about Bigfoot tonight. So, we're just going over some of the more popular stories of Bigfoot and we're going to see what we think about it. So, basically, this one, they just found some big footprints and initially they thought it was a prank, but then, what kind of prankster is going to be able to lift a 450-pound barrel of oil? I doubt very many pranksters would be able to lift that up. And then in other areas, they also have uh, different names for Bigfoot, but it's essentially the same creature. But here's the interesting thing: though these creatures are similar, they do have. Hello, Robert Sanchez. Welcome in. Though these creatures are similar, they do have different slight cultural variations, such as, and I've got a list of their names right here. In Alabama, they have the White Thing. In Alaska, they have one called Nantinak. In Arizona, the Mogollon Monster. Arkansas has the Folk Monster. Delaware has the Shelbyville Swamp Monster. Florida has the Skunk Ape. I've actually heard of that one before. Georgia has the Elkins Creek Beast. In Illinois, they have a big muddy monster. Oh, that sounds like a fun one. Kentucky has a hillbilly beast. Louisiana has a Honey Island swamp monster. Michigan has the Dewey Lake monster. Mississippi has the Chautauqua monster. Missouri has Momo the monster. New York, Monster of White Half. Ohio has both Grassman and the Minerva monster. Virginia has wood boogers, as I believe James mentioned a minute ago. And West Virginia has old men of the mountain. The term wood ape is also used by some as a means to deviate from the perceived mythical connotation surrounding the name Bigfoot. Other popular names include Bushman, Treeman, and Wildman. Now, what's really interesting is I heard out that there was a story of a hunter. Now, this is the part I was trying to remember. I was trying to find the story for earlier, but I couldn't find the story, so I'm just going to say it from memory because I was researching it earlier this morning. So there was a story about a hunter I think his last name was Beck or Decker or Beck, something like that. But there was a hunter and he went out and with his friends and they saw a Bigfoot and it got away. So they went back to their cabin and started relaxing and, eating dinner and just chilling for the night, right? So when they got out there, when they got back to their cabin and they were relaxing, they're getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden they heard little stones being thrown at their window. So they looked out, and the Bigfoot was back, but it had brought friends this time. And what's really interesting is they brought friends this time, and they started throwing bigger rocks at there and stuff. Thank you for your subscription, Robert Sanchez. Uh, James says this is Ape Canyon. So let me see if I can actually look this up real quick. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so I actually found I found the story. Thank you, James. So this says in July 1924, five gold prospectors in Washington's Ape Canyon near Mount St. Helens claimed they were attacked by massive, hairy, ape-like creatures known as mountain devils. Now, before I get into this actually when this goes deeper, it actually leads into the belief that Bigfoot might be an interdimensional creature because they're able to disappear so quickly in many of these stories. James also recommends Albert Ostman kidnapping. Okay, I'll look into that in just a second. Give me 1 second. All right, so we'll look into that one next. I got it pulled up now. So James, old 8 gauge over here, is our resident Bigfoot expert. He knows everything about Bigfoot. I'm sure he's our expert on that. So, anyways, back to the Ape Canyon story. So the incident began when one miner shot a 7-foot tall creature after spotting it near the cabin. So that's what I said, when he was out hunting earlier. That night, the group endured a siege where the 8 men threw rocks, pushed against the walls, and attempted to grab an axe through a gap in the logs. So they were throwing rocks, and then at one point, the apes actually got closer to the cabin and they actually managed to reach through the door and try to grab an axe before they were able to, fight them back off. The miners survived the night by firing their rifles, and at dawn, one prospector reportedly shot another creature that tumbled into the canyon gorge. The story, detailed by lead prospector Fred Beck. See, I was right. It was Beck. I had that name right. In his book, I Fought the 8 Men of Mount St. Helens, became a national sensation and helped establish the Pacific Northwest as the epicenter of Bigfoot lore. So there is a lot of lore surrounding Bigfoot, and this is just one of the more popular stories. But here's something interesting. It says that there is some physical evidence for this, however. In 2013, researcher Mark Mersell located the original cabin site, uncovering spent rifle cartridges and structural debris that aligned with Beck's account, though no biological remains were found. And one story that people have, one theory, people have about why the biological remains are often not found is they believe it might be because Bigfoot could be interdimensional creatures and they're able to travel between our dimension and another dimension. And when they know that they're going to die, they'll go to another dimension and, pass away there so that they don't leave their remains to where they can be found. And that's one reason why people theorize that we might not be able to find the remains because they actually pass away in a different dimension. And a lot of these stories surrounding Bigfoot actually do talk about strange flora and fauna that are not common, or not just uncommon, sorry, but completely strange, bizarre, and alien. Like, even people who are like park rangers and forest rangers who should know this kind of stuff are like, I've never seen any sort of flowers or fauna like this in my entire life before. I have no idea what's going on here. So that's another, bit of, what would it be called, anecdotal evidence to theorize that Bigfoots might be from a different dimension. Now, the hoax theories, skeptics argue that the event was a prank by local loggers, the St. Helens apes, who used wooden feet to create fake tracks, or a case of mass hysteria fueled by the miners' interest in spiritualism. And the cultural impact says that this event predates the term Bigfoot and is considered one of the earliest and most violent documented cryptid encounters in American history. So, that is a pretty big deal in Bigfoot lore and the Bigfoot culture. Now, next up, James told us to look up Albert Ostman. This says Albert Ostman was a Swedish born Canadian prospector who claimed to have been abducted by a Sasquatch in 1924 near Toba Inlet in the British Columbia. He alleged that a large creature carried him in his sleeping bag for approximately 3 hours and held him captive for 6 days with a family of four Sasquatch, including an 8-foot tall male, a 7-foot female, and two children. So essentially, he had a whole entire Sasquatch family. That's kind of interesting to think about, actually. Like the fact that it didn't just straight up, get rid of him, but it actually like took the man and tried to raise him as one of its own. Like, that shows that these creatures care. Maybe in a in a way that we find strange or unique that we don't quite understand, but in their own way, they're not just completely violent, and maybe there's some evidence that they might care. Ostman described the creatures as vegetarians. See, I told you they cared. I told you they were caring creatures who communicated in their own language and slept under blankets woven from cedar bark. He claimed to have escaped by offering snuff to the adult male, which caused him to become sick and disoriented. So basically, what he did is he drugged his kidnapper and ran away. Ostman then fled while the creature sought water. He did not report the incident publicly until 1957, 33 years later, citing fear of being thought crazy. And even in 1957, so this happened in 1924, think about the time period. They did have mental asylums back then, so it's not unlikely that he would have been locked away against his will if he had said anything about that, especially without evidence. So I can understand why he kept quiet about that for so long. Now, it said the key details to summarize, it says he was picked up while sleeping and carried roughly 25 miles to a plateau where he was fed sweet tasting grass and nuts and observed the family's daily routines without being harmed. See, this suggests that these creatures only become violent once they feel threatened. So maybe if we could stop, shooting first and asking questions never, then maybe we could learn a little bit more about these creatures. But, you know how humans are. So the male Sasquatch swallowed a box of snuff and Osman's coffee grounds, which is when he was able to escape. In As for verification, in 1957, police magistrate A.M. Naismith swore an affidavit stating Ostman appeared to be of sound mind and found no flaws in his story. Now, as for the skeptics, the critics, such as Joe Nickell, argue that the story resembles the European folk tale of Born, who was kidnapped by a Marfalot, suggesting Ostman's account may be imaginative rather than factual. But here's my counter proposal. Okay? Many of our myths, legends, lore, whatever you want to call it, many of our fictional stories are based and have deep symbolism rooted in the truth. Because I've come up with my own conclusion about even what we call science fiction or mythology, there's some form of truth, even if it's not a direct truth. There is some truth in there hidden deep within symbolism and the story itself. Even like, for example, we have a lot of, horror movies and modern movies where we say based on a true story, and something like Paranormal Activity. Okay, maybe there really was a person named, Jane or whatever, but she, maybe she really wasn't possessed by a demon. Maybe she didn't really kill her husband, and she didn't really kidnap a baby, but someone named Jane did exist at some point in time, so technically it was based on a true story, or whatever her name was, but you get my point. So they could argue that it was based on a true story simply because they used the same names as real people. you know so it's very easy to twist and blur the lines between fantasy and reality. You know, so what I'm suggesting is even what we consider to be fiction is still important in its own way because it tells us stories through symbolism and relation of the story. So I think a lot of this is more important than we give it credit for. So these are just two of the most popular stories about Bigfoot. Now, another one is that a lot of Native Americans actually have stories about Bigfoot as well. And they talk about how, you know, some Native Americans used to be taller. And I would like to bring in the idea of the Wendigo. Now, Wendigo, as we briefly mentioned in our last episode on cryptids, are very tall and they often become cannibals. They are created because someone the legend of the Wendigo goes essentially that they are cannibals, and that's why they become Wendigo. And they are very fast, tall, and weak to fire. Now, James, old 8 gauge in the chat, says Daniel Boone shot and trapped and shot. Hold on, I can't talk. My apologies. Daniel Boone shot one, and a trapper named Bauman told President Teddy Roosevelt about an encounter. Oh, I did hear about that earlier. He's right. And so let me look that up real quick so I can get some more details on that. Thank you for reminding me about that one. That's a very good one. All right, so let's see what we got here. Here we go. I found an article about it. This says this was published in 1893. So since I'm reading from an article, I may as well share the screen with everybody. So let's go ahead and share this. Let me see where this is. Here we go. So right here, Teddy Roosevelt's retelling of an old trapper's encounter in the Bitterroot Mountains. You know what? I'll even read it in what I imagine Teddy Roosevelt's voice would sound like. Oh, this is pretty long. Maybe I'll just read sections of it. Let's see. The following is Teddy Roosevelt's retelling in full. So I'll read sections of it. Frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and those few were of a perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But I once listened to a goblin story which rather impressed me. A grizzled, weather beaten old mountain hunter by the name of Bowman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at a certain point of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghosts and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers and the specters and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and then dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who, after nightfall, passes through the regions where they lurk. And it may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time and still more in remembrance, weird elfin traits to what was merely some wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. So basically, what he's saying is that he believes. Oh, hold up. So James says, this is why I have 8 gadget shotguns. Can't find a 4 gauge yet. And they are why I own elephant guns. Ooh, elephant gun sounds pretty unique and interesting. I haven't gotten into guns yet, but I would like to someday. It seems to be a very expensive hobby. I looked into it and I actually found a gun I want, but it's like $800. So, geez. And I still gotta get the gun license and all that stuff. But yes, thank you for saying you love the voices, James. I'm having fun. But basically, it sounds like Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, as his friends called him, is basically saying that he believes that his friend just had a very traumatic experience and basically made something up to cope with his experience. So let's skip down a little bit and let's start from here and continue reading. So we skipped a little bit. While Bowman was making ready supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, Bowman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs. Ha 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 ha! Bowman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right. And upon again examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up in their blankets and went to sleep under the lean to. So they just decided that the footprints couldn't possibly be humans, and then up to $10,000 for some. Oh wow, that's wild. So he's basically saying that they both decided these could not possibly be the footprints of a human. Let's just go to bed. No, I think I would want to examine them a little more and try to figure out what we're dealing with before we just casually roll up in our sleeping bag and go to bed. Like, what? Let's figure out what we're dealing with a little bit better. So let's skip it a little bit further down. All right, let's see what we got here. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they should shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing good game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. Okay, I think we're getting closer to the Bigfoot part, so let's keep going. At noon, they were back within a couple miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fears seemed absurd to the two armed men, accustomed as they were, through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bowman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beavers in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into the beaver house. He took several hours securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked, with some uneasiness, how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward camp under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed upon him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays, striking through among the straight trunks, made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these sombre, primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Okay, I think we're almost there. We're getting close. Near it lay the packs wrapped and arranged. At first, Bauman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks at the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log, with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled around it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over it. It had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Bauman, utterly unnerved and believing the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle, and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows, where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until beyond reach of pursuit. Roosevelt was obviously so impressed by the validity of the tale as to share it along with his own reflections of life in the wilderness, apparently believing a man as tough and stoic of character as Bauman rendered able to hardly repress a shudder while reliving the distant memory as proof enough. And the source comes directly from Theodore Roosevelt himself in The Wilderness Hunter, New York, G.P. Putnam's Sons, 1893, and Michael Newton, When Bigfoot Attacks, a global survey of alleged Sasquatch Yeti predation, North Devon, England, CFZ Press, 2011. So we have some very interesting stories we got through tonight. And that is all I've got for you tonight. Thank you for coming to hang out. Big shout out to old 8 Gauge in the chat for giving us some good stories to look into. Thank you very much for your help. We had some very good discussions tonight, and you know what? We might see if we can get a few more stories for another episode next week and do a part two because I actually really enjoyed this. And we also got to dig into the connection between UFOs, aliens, and Bigfoot. That's going to be an interesting one to dig deeper into. Thank you all for coming to hang out, and we will see you next time. As always, stay uncanny.